language assessment and its place. Language as evidence about people is a natural reaction to hearing or reading any fragment of language to use it as evidence about the person who produced it. When we speak on the telephone to people whom we have not met, we may use the sound of their voice, its accents and pitch to give us clues about whether they are native speaker of our language, which region they come from, their gender, age, social class, and profession, and their mood and attitudes. It seems that we can't help forming an opinion about people according to the kind of language they produce. In Britain, surveys of customers of telephone call centers investigating attitudes toward accent show that British people tend to associate American accent with high levels of success, Scottish accents with trustworthiness, and the accents of people who come from large cities such as London, Liverpool, and Birmingham, with low levels of both diagnoses post-2006. This attitude may be unreasonable, but we are more likely to listen and believe messages delivered by voices that we find pleasing and trustworthy. Businesses know this and carefully choose actors with suitable accent to deliver their advertising messages. Part 1. If we receive a letter or email from someone, we base similar judgments on their choice of words and written style. We may even begin to form ideas about their appearance and personality. As you read this, you are probably already building up a picture in your mind of the writer of this book. When you do this kind of thing, you are using the language that a person produces to make inferences or draw conclusions about them. Linguistic evidence can sometimes be used quite formally to give insights into a person's identity or personality. Experts in forensic linguistics often try to establish where a suspect comes from by studying his or her accent or speech pattern. Sometimes employers look at the size and shape of job applicants' handwritings because this is supposed to give insights into their personalities. However, this kind of inferences about people's regional origins or characteristics are not usually what is implied by the term language assessment. In this book, the focus is on assessment, where knowledge about language, the ability to use language or skills in applying this are measured or evaluated. In everyday life, we not only make judgments about people on the basis of how they use language, we also make judgments about the qualities of the language that they use. We notice when they make grammatical errors or choose an inappropriate word, when they appear impolite or overly formal, when they are very hesitant, when they are very being unclear or imprecise, or on the other hand, when they seem to express their ideas particularly well. We also judge our own use of language. As we speak or write, we monitor and correct ourselves. We put right our sleeves or the tongue and fix our spelling mistakes with or without the help of our word processing software. We replace the things we say if people mindset, and as we recognize our written text to try to make our ideas clearer to our readers. The nature of the knowledge, skills, and abilities involved in the learning and using a language is a matter of debate. An introduction to some of the contentious issues that excited language assessment. Specialist is given in Part 3. Briefly, knowledge about language may include recognizing a word written in the foreign language and knowing a translation equivalent word English can be translated as in Arabic, in Chinese, or vowel in the German, or knowing a grammatical rule, the past participate in regular verbs is formed by adding ed to the stem. Look, or knowing pragmatic conversation. For example, is most circumstances, how are you? Spoken by acquaintance is likely to be intended as a conventional greeting. The anticipated response might be good, you, rather that details the other feelings or of any medical conditions. A distinction is often made in language education following HIMSS 1972 between knowledge of the rules governing language as a system and the ability to actually use language in unrehearsed interaction. Learners may know a good deal about a language but be unable putting language assessment in its place. 5 access the words or phrases they know in the course of a conversations or be unable to pronounce them accurately. Conversely, many people are able to communicate effectively in a wide range of situations with little or no explicit knowledge of the system of rules that govern the language. They are using language skills involve drawing on language knowledge and language abilities in order to read, listen, write, speak, to interact with others, or to mediate between them. The evidence we have of person using a language may be very limited, a few telephone conversations, and a handful of emails, perhaps, but based on what we observe these few instances. We often make inferences about their more general knowledge of a language, their ability to use the language, and their skill in carrying out language-related tasks. We may hear them speak for just a few minutes, but reach conclusions such as Adele knows more Albanian than I do or Bonita can get by in Bengali. We see a few examples of the writing and we make statements such as Carol can write very Polish business letters in Chinese or Daifi and this it's really difficult to form question in Danish. The major focus on this book will be on the use of language assessment. In educational context, these settings for language assessment is unusual in some important ways. Firstly, language teachers, unlike most of us, are actually expected to voice their judgment about other people's language use and are generally rewarded rather than resented for pointing out and correcting errors. If you have worked as a language teacher, you will probably have experience during the natural course of any lessons of deciding whether one of your students has produced accurate and appropriate language, and perhaps putting right mistakes they have made or asking them to try again. You have probably asked them to read or listen to a text in a foreign language and then ask them questions about it to check their understanding of a defined language assessment in this book. Example can range from informal classroom activities to well-known national and international language tests. So, here is a simple definition. Language assessments involves obtaining evidence to inform inferences about a person's language-related knowledge, skills, or abilities. The evidence Deviations come from the performance of tasks that involve the use of language. The inferences are what we interpret the performance to mean based on our belief about the nature of language and its role in life of the person being assessed. The inferences we make about accesses, the term I will use in this book for the people being assessed, are generally used to inform decision that can range in magnitude from whether it would be better for them to use another comma in a sentence or a saying certain phrase again, to whether they should be given a job or permitted to make their home in a certain county. In language education, teacher training programs tend to give assessment rather little attention. Assessment is often the topic of just a few sessions, apparently an issue of little direct concern to the teacher, perhaps but left to expert specialists. On the other hand, it sometimes seems to take on overriding importance in the lives of teachers and learners. Many school children, if asked why they are learning a foreign language, would answer that they are doing it mainly to pass a public test, often known as an examination. Most language teachers spend a good deal of time assessing their students, and especially when the day of an important national examination is getting close, many dedicate most of their classes to preparing their students to take these tests. In this book, I argue that language assessment is inseparable from the teaching and learning of languages. This challenges the more traditional view in teacher education that assessment is a distinct activity, one that is marginal to the main business of the language teachers. In my view, teachers need to develop what is sometimes called assessment literacy. They not only need to understand something about how language assessment are made, scored, and interpreted by others, but also to be able to make, score, and interpret the results of useful assessments themselves. Experience suggests that low levels of assessment literacy can lead to bad educational decisions and to teaching and learning that are less effective than they could be. Assessment and testing, the traditional view that separates assessment from teaching, may result from the identification of the word assessment with the narrower activity of testing. A test is an event that is especially set up to elicit a performance, usually within a predetermined time frame, for the purpose of making judgments about a person, knowledge, skills, or abilities. In the course of a language test, the person being judged, the assessee, a test taker, testee, or candidate, will respond to the prompt, an essay title, question, asked by interviewer, a set of choices on the test paper. The test taker response is judged or scored according to a mark scheme. This predetermined procedures such as identifying and calculating the the proportion of correct answer. 14 out of 20, counting the number of errors in the piece of writing, assigning points or marks to an essay to match description presented on a scale, etc. The outcome is a score or grade which is then formally recorded. The formalities and rituals of formal testing and the penalties associated with failure can make them an intimidating experience for the test taker. For some commendators, assessment is distinguished from testing because it covers a much broader cycle of activities. In addition to the putting language assessment in its place, 7. Test events, which involves eliciting a performance as evidence of language abilities. These activities include deciding on the content of the test, scoring the performance, deciding on the meaning of the scores obtained, decisions that scores are used to justify, such as choosing which students to admit onto a course or deciding whether to award certificate. In this view, the test is just one step in a sequence of events, which together make up a cycle of assessment. From another point of view, the word testing can refer to this entire cycle of assessment events, but the tests are understood to make up a relatively small set of controlled procedure among a much broader range of options. Assessment is a more general term than testing and takes in many different methods of obtaining and evaluating language data, including less formal procedure with fewer controls and restrictions than tests. While it can be helpful to remind ourselves that assessment involves a whole cycle of interrelated activities, it is the second of these distinctions, the range of options for obtaining information, that is more often made in discussion of language assessment, and so is the one used in this book. In contrast to tests, other forms of assessments may involve such activity as informal questioning in class by teachers, semi-formal exercises and quizzes carried out in class, learners reflecting on their own use of language self-assessment, learners judging each other's performance, peer assessment, the collection of the samples of language that have not been elicited according to any fixed or formal plan. Examples this include observation and some forms of portfolio assessment. Observation involves teachers watching and recording student performance in classroom activities. Portfolios are collections of student work that may showcase their best achievements or represent progress over a period of time.